get started. Now that we have observed Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Holy Week, Easter, and Pentecost, we enter the final season of the church year called ordinary time or proper time. This season is quite long. It lasts all the way through the summer and into the fall until the new church year begins again with Advent. This season is not ordinary as in humdrum or nothing special. It is ordinary as in ordinal or counted. The weeks are counted as first Sunday after Pentecost, second Sunday after Pentecost, third Sunday after Pentecost, and so on. Or they're also counted as proper 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Because the timing of Easter and therefore Pentecost is dependent on the cycle of the moon and not the Gregorian calendar, there are sometimes more proper weeks and sometimes less proper weeks. So this year, because of the timing of Easter, we skip all the way to proper 7 this coming Sunday. This year during ordinary time, the Revised Common Lectionary is focusing on the Gospel of Jesus as told by Luke. So if your congregation follows that lectionary, that's likely what you'll be doing over the next several months. If your congregation follows the narrative lectionary, you might be focusing on the 10 Commandments, 1 Peter, and Ruth during ordinary time. Dr. Will Gaffney, in the lectionary that we are following, has chosen to have the Old Testament lesson drive the choices in her lectionary. She guides the reader through a study through Ruth, Samuel, and Kings. So the gospel passages we will contemplate are chosen by Gaffney to expand on the Old Testament lesson for each week. I think I mentioned that beginning in Advent of this coming year, I would like to go through this Year W women's lectionary again and contemplate the Old Testament scriptures instead of the gospel text. But for this year, we will continue to walk with Jesus and his companions using the gospel texts. The theme this week is God provides. Our text is Matthew 29 through 30, Matthew chapter 15, verse 29 to 39. In this passage, Jesus again heals many people whom society sees as needing to be fixed. This happened and was recorded at a time when society viewed wholeness and health as able-bodied. Hopefully, many of us are beginning to see that shalom or wholeness is a much broader category than what we previously assumed. This text also includes the story of the feeding of a very large crowd with a very small amount of food, 7 loaves of bread and a few fish. Just one chapter earlier, in Matthew chapter 14, Jesus fed another huge crowd with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Commentators have spilled much ink on why Matthew has 2 miraculous feeding stories. They've compared the 2 stories, especially the numbers in them. The first crowd was 5,000 men, the second crowd 4,000. 12 baskets of leftovers the first time, 7 baskets the second time. Many commentators suggest that the first feeding was a Jewish crowd and the second feeding was a Gentile crowd. N.T. Wright, in his commentary on Matthew, claims that there's no reason to suppose that this crowd is either Gentile or in Gentile territory. He points out that the important thing for this passage is that it occurs on a mountain. Wright reminds the reader of the Old Testament prophecies in which Jerusalem, or Zion, would become the great mountain to which the nations would flock to be saved. In this passage, Jesus is the one to whom everyone flocks. And Jesus is the Zion that provides a feast of salvation for everyone who comes. So before I read the passage, I will light my candle as a symbol of God's presence with us here today. And I pray for the following graces: to know Jesus more intimately, to love him more intensely, and to follow him more closely. Matthew 15:29-39. After Jesus had left Tyre and Sidon, he went by the Sea of Galilee and went up the mountain, sitting down there. Great crowds came to him, bringing with them disabled, blind, and mute people, and people missing body parts, along with many others. Then they put them at his feet, and he healed them, so that the crowd was amazed when they saw mute people speaking, people missing body parts made whole, disabled people walking, and blind people seeing. And they praised the God of Israel. Then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for the crowd, because they have stayed with me for 3 days now and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, for they might collapse on the road. The disciples said to him, where are we to get so much bread in the desert as to feed so great a crowd? Jesus asked them, how many loaves do you have? They said, 7, and a few small fish. Then, ordering the crowd to sit down on the ground, Jesus took the 7 loaves and the fish and gave thanks. And giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples. The disciples gave them to the crowds, and all of them ate and were filled. And they took up the abundance of fragments, 7 baskets full. Those who ate were women and children, besides 4,000 men. Then, sending away the crowds, Jesus got into the boat and went to the region of Magadan. This is the word of the Lord. Before I guide you through the passage with questions and pauses, let us take a couple of centering breaths. Breathing out anything that distracts you from being in the presence of God, and breathing in God's Spirit. I pray again for today's graces, to know Jesus more intimately, to love him more intensely, and to follow him more closely. I invite you to enter the story. After Jesus had left Tyre and Sidon, he went by the Sea of Galilee, and he went up the mountain, sitting down there. As you travel with Jesus and the others past the Sea of Galilee, what are you experiencing? Do you notice the breeze coming off the water? What sounds do you hear? Perhaps your feet are sore from walking 20 miles. Maybe you're remembering the interesting conversation Jesus just had with a Canaanite woman. She debated with Jesus until he agreed to heal her daughter. He complimented her great faith. As you climb the mountain with Jesus and watch him sit down, what do you suppose he will teach about next? Great crowds came to Jesus, bringing with them disabled, blind, and mute people, and people missing body parts, along with many others. What do you think as you watch all these people flock to Jesus? What is your attitude toward these people? Do you know any of them? What interactions do you have with them? Then they put those who were disabled at Jesus's feet, and he healed them, so that the crowd was amazed when they saw mute people speaking, people missing body parts made whole, disabled people walking, and blind people seeing. As you sit at the feet of Jesus for 3 days, witnessing miracle after miracle after miracle, what are you feeling? Are you amazed by the healing they're receiving? Do you go to Jesus about a thorn in the flesh that you are experiencing? If so, does Jesus heal you in the way you are expecting? What does it feel like to be healed? Does Jesus remain seated for the entire 3 days? Or does he get up and walk among the people, encouraging them, blessing them, playing with the children? And the people praised the God of Israel. How do you react to the praise? What form does their praise take? What does it look like and sound like? Do you join in and worship God also? Or perhaps you are growing impatient and hungry. Then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for the crowd because they have stayed with me for 3 days now and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, for they might collapse on the road. What expression does Jesus have on his face as he speaks about the compassion for the people he is feeling in his core? Can you sense his deep, deep love for the crowd? His deep, deep love for you. The disciples said to Jesus, "Where are we to get so much bread in the desert to feed so great a crowd?" What do you think about the disciples' response? Jesus asked them, "How many loaves do you have?" They said, 7 and a few small fish. As you look at the meager 3-day-old stale rations laid out in front of Jesus, what are you feeling? Do you notice your stomach growl or mouth salivate as you look at the food and realize that you haven't eaten anything in 3 days? Let your eye gaze shift back and forth between the tiny pile of food and the enormous crowd. What emotions are you experiencing? Do you have an intense feeling of scarcity? Then, ordering the crowd to sit down on the ground, Jesus took the 7 loaves and the fish, and giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples. The disciples gave them to the crowds. As thousands of people settled themselves, what is the mood of the crowd? As you watch Jesus give thanks for this tiny pile of food, what are you feeling? Then Jesus begins to break the bread, and he keeps breaking it and breaking it and breaking it again and again and again and again. Suddenly, the meager pile of food has become an abundant feast. The disciples wander through the crowd distributing the bounty. Reach out and take a loaf of heavenly touched bread. Breathe in its fresh baked scent. Notice the gleam of the sun as it shines on this perfect loaf of bread. Lift it to your lips and take a bite. How does it taste? Notice the sensations in your body as your stomach is filled to capacity. And all of them ate and were filled. What is the mood of the crowd now? How are the people responding to this miracle of multiplication? And they took up the abundance of fragments, 7 baskets full. Those who ate were women and children, besides 4,000 men. Do you help gather the leftovers? Can you believe your eyes when you see that there is more food there after thousands of people have eaten than before a single crumb was consumed? Then, sending away the crowds, Jesus got into the boat and went to the region of Magadan. As the crowd dissipates, each person with a full belly, what are you feeling? Take a moment to ponder all that God has provided here on this mountain. I invite you to spend the next 10 minutes in a colloquy with the divine. Speak to God about what you experienced during the contemplation of this text, especially the parts of the story that caused you to experience strong emotions. What might God be saying to you about your life as it relates to this story? When I sound my chimes, this will indicate that you have about a minute to wrap up your colloquy, after which time I will end the silence with a reading from Acts. If you're doing this contemplation later with the recording, go ahead and hit pause now so that you can spend as much time in silent conversation with God as you feel you need. Then restart the video when you are ready to hear the reading. I will close our time of silence reading Acts 2:43 to 47. All came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were as one and held all things in common. They sold their possessions and property and distributed the proceeds to all as any had need. Daily they continued with the same purpose in the temple. They broke bread at home and ate their food with gladness and simplicity in heart. They praised God and had the gratitude of all the people. And day by day, the Holy One added to their numbers those who were being saved. Amen.